Hello, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to episode 45 of the Navigating Turbulent Times webinar from IWFM, where we explore the latest trends and developments impacting the world of workplace and facilities management professionals. My name is Chris Moriarty. I'm Director of Insight and Engagement, and I'm your host for today. So in today's episode, we're going to be exploring the findings from our latest UK employee poll, which has been exploring home working as it is and what the expectations and desires are for home working in the future. And it confirms some of the current thinking that we've seen from the various studies around hybrid working and the idea that we're looking at a kind of 3 to 4 day week in the office, but it also looks to help us explore what may be driving some of those future work patterns. So we'll talk more about that in a second. But you won't be just hearing from me. To help us process some of these findings, I'm joined by two experts in their field. Firstly, I'll be joined by Derek Tate, who leads operations in real estate advisory at PwC, covering property services, hybrid transformation, suspect that might be a new addition to the bio, facilities management, digital technology, and sustainability. He's over 20 years experience and he's been advising clients on developing and implementing the right strategies to manage real estate, particularly the interaction of people, place, and technology. And we'll also be joined by Maureen Brown, who is Managing Director at Recruiters Sullivan Resourcing Partners. She's worked in recruitment since 1997, specialising in human resources and executive appointments. She set up Sullivan Brown Resourcing Partners in 2013 to offer higher quality HR recruitment and consultancy services. Covering originally from the northwest of England and now based in the northeast, Maureen has a strong HR network and now runs regular HR networking events across the north of England. So what we've got is a expert around people and places, so we've got that covered. I've got a few questions that I'll be asking them, but this is really your opportunity to put the questions to them as well. So you'll see that in the chat function, the question function, sorry, in your windows on your GoToWebinar panel, and I'll be picking up those questions and putting them to the panel as we go through the webinar. But firstly, though, I want to take you through some of our data, and the first place to start on that is actually not our data, but ONS data when we're looking at home working. So ONS published some data that looked at home working in December 2019, so pre-pandemic, and what they said was that 26% of the workforce have done some sort of home working in the past. Now this was split almost half and half of that 8.7 million workers. About 4 million of them had done weekly home working, i.e. they had worked from home the week prior to the study, and the remainder were people who have done some sort of home working at some point in their career. So that gives you a kind of idea of the scale of the amount of home working that took place prior to the pandemic. So 74% of people couldn't, can't, wouldn't work from home in a previous lifetime. They conducted a similar study in April of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, where we saw that the number of people working from home had actually risen to 46% of people. So that includes those that had already had experience of working from home and about 6.5 million people who had previously had no experience. Now, what that leaves for us, and I think this is an important starting point for a lot of this discussion, is about 54% of people who during the pandemic weren't able to work from home. Now that's frontline staff, it might be nurses, it might be people working in manufacturing, it could be construction industry, which was right at the heart of the frontline workers debate at the start of the pandemic. It might also, it's not very clear how furlough workers are treated within this data, so there could be a little bit of that in there as well. But really what we're saying is that there's a workforce split, almost half and half, where people who can work from home and people who don't. But what we really want to understand, and the million-dollar question, is what does that look like going forward? Once the restrictions have eased, once workplaces have opened up and there's no restrictions on what they can do, what will people choose to do? Will they be given the choice? And that's what we wanted to explore with our data. Now, our data, we've done 3 polls now. We did one in April, we did one in June, and we've just completed one in March, and that's where some of the data is coming from here. It's important to note these are UK employees, so this is not our membership. We've been using polling tools to go out to the UK population at large to understand how home working has been for them, what they plan to do in the future. So what do they plan to do in the future, and how much are they looking forward to getting back into the office? Well, when we asked the question the first time in April, we saw about half the working population were keen to get back to the office, about 20%, 1 in 5, weren't looking forward to going back, and then about a third were kind of not sure, not going back, or didn't feel very strongly. So that was a kind of our breakdown. But when we asked again in June, what we saw was a huge shift. We saw a shift down from the amount of people that wanted to get back to the office, and a shift up from people that weren't looking forward to it. And the rest was still about a third. But you can see it's exactly a third each way on those looking forward to going back and those not looking forward to going back. So what happened in March when we asked the question? Well, it's kind of leveled out again, where we see 60% of people looking forward to going back to the office. Now, that I haven't broken it down here, but some of that did have people who said that they were keen to go back, but with some reservations. But what this is kind of saying to us, I think really the June dip was probably more to do with going out in public at all during June, not necessarily linked to the office itself. But there is a future for the office, but it's probably not going to be as we remember it. Now, we've had a look at this and bundled it up to see how many people want to work from home permanently, 1 to 2 days, 3 to 4 days, and work from the office permanently. And we've included this line here, which is people that don't have a choice. Now, just to give you an idea, about 80% of those people that won't have a choice were doing 5 days a week prior. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the scale. But look, it's saying what most studies have shown us, that 3 to 4 days is predominantly the most interesting, the most sought after work pattern. But what we're really interested in is what the change is, not necessarily what it's going to be in the future, but how is that going to change? Because that's going to be the thing that's going to keep teams up at night, because they would have built workplaces around a kind of occupancy level, and how's that going to change? Now, if we look at this is from our March study, when we asked these people what they were doing prior to the pandemic, about 2/3 of them were working from the office all the time. When you then put the people that have a choice into that, we can see that it drops dramatically from 5 day a week, and you can see where that's gone into. It's partly gone into the 1 to 2 days a week gang, which is kind of doubled, as has the 3 to 4 days a week, but 3 to 4 days a week being the most popular choice. I've added in here the people that don't have a choice and use their previous pattern as an indicator. But you can see, even with that, what we're talking about really is the number of people that you've got in your workplace that work from home on a weekly basis is likely to double, right? So the amount of people doing, to put it another way, the amount of people that are going to be working in the office full time is going to halve from what it is today. But it's important, and this is where I want to take some of the conversation, and these are just some of the highlights. We've got some more data that we'll be releasing in due course, but it's not as easy as just looking at this and saying, right, okay, well, this is the amount of people that we're going to have in, because every organization will be different, every workplace will be different. But we looked at the data through certain lenses to see if there was any trends that we could spot about why some people want to work in certain ways and some people don't. Now, first one is age, and age has been used an awful lot for saying that young people want to get back to the office because. Now, the truth of the matter is, yes, they are more likely to want to work 4 to 5 days a week in the office than other age groups. This is the 18 to 24-year-olds. But still, 50% of that group, that 18 to 24-year-olds, want to do 3 days or less. So there's not this sort of wholesale shift that the young people are desperate to get back into the work. And also, 18 to 24-year-olds, 75% of them think they will be as productive, if not more productive, at home. And we will talk about the kind of productivity idea in our discussion. We looked at home work setting, and that doesn't have an impact on the sense of productivity, but it does have a massive impact on people's desire to get back into the office. And sofa surfers, people working on sofas, on beds, and sort of uncomfortable conditions, much more likely to say they're looking forward to getting back to the office, even if it's not necessarily to improve their productivity, but it's comfort, it's enjoyment, and all the rest of it. And the reason that the age thing's been conflated is because 18 to 24-year-olds are much more likely to be our sofa surfers. We looked at gender. Men more likely to want to be in the office 4 to 5 days a week than women. Women more likely to select 1 day in office or working from home permanently, more likely to select that than men. And children and no children was a factor. When we took respondents with children out of the equation, we saw that the work patterns were fairly similar across the genders. When we added children back to the mix, we saw and took the no children parents employees out, we actually saw a strengthening of that trend, and we saw that men with children much more likely to want to be 4 or 5 days a week in the office, women with children much more likely to want to work from home or 1 day a week, and I want to explore that a little bit in our discussion. Hierarchy came into it. People managers more likely to want to work 3, 4, 5 days a week in the office. Middle managers particularly wanting to work 5 days a week in the office. Senior managers more likely to select 4 days a week in the office. I can't imagine which day they won't be coming in. So that was certainly a factor. Administrators, when given the choice, more likely than managers to be wanting to work from home permanently or 1 day a week. But interestingly, senior managers seem to be the only ones really that given the choice. Middle managers and administrators much more likely to report that they will have no choice in the matter. And the last thing we looked at was financial. So 15% of employees have had no financial investment, whether from themselves or from their organisation. Those with investment are more likely to select the hybrid work, the 2, 3, 4 days a week people. People without investment that basically think that they don't have a choice, so that kind of commitment from their organisations had a factor. But again, senior managers more likely to get that investment. So we can see that this isn't a straightforward debate. It's nuanced. It will be different for every organisation, and we've just picked 5 filters that you can look at how your workforce might respond to this and why. But we haven't talked about things like activities, like the culture of the organisation, like the sort of activities your organisation does generally. But what does that look like going forward? So what we're kind of estimating using the ONS data is that, look, that 50% or so of people, the 17.8 million people, are likely to still work in the way they would do. That's the construction workers, the frontline workers. But then the number of people working from home weekly, this is, they've said that they will do 4 days or less a week in the office, is likely to get to 10.7 million. Now that's going to mean there's about 2 million more people that are going to experience home working that previously hadn't. But remember that number I said about 4 million people that do it weekly, it's doubling. So again, it's that same number that I was talking to you about earlier on. The number of people working from home on a regular basis is likely to double, and that's going to cause some challenges for organizations. And it's important, and this is the last stat from the data that I'm going to share today, it's important that we get this right, because we also asked, would you look for another job if you weren't offered that flexibility? And you can see there that we're getting on for 50% of people said, yes, I agree, I will be looking for other work if my organisation doesn't give me this offering. So it's important we get this right, and interestingly, that number really strengthens when you ask 18 to 24-year-olds. So again, talent, future talent could be affected by your ability to offer hybrid working. So that's enough from me. What I'm going to do now is invite our panelists to turn their cameras on, turn their microphones on as we get into the Q&A. As we've already said, you can submit your questions through the questions panel. I will be reviewing them as they come in. I'll be putting the questions to Maureen and Derek. But for now, I just want to start us off with both of you saying a quick hello, but also just tell us a little bit about what the last 18 months have been like for you in work. How have you been working? How different is it to what you've done previously, and what has it changed, for you going forward, and how you might change your work pattern? Derek, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's been strange. I mean, when pandemic first happened, it was, we were planning this sort of A team, B team, where we might be at home 1 week and in the office alternate weeks, and that lasted about 1 day, and then it was full lockdown. I was probably quite naive. I thought I'll have a couple of weeks to catch up in admin and do a bit of planning and catch up with colleagues and clients, and then it'll be back to normal. I couldn't have been more wrong. Huh? I mean, largely, I've found the whole home working beneficial and good. I've enjoyed it. It's been hard work. I mean, I've done very long, very intense days a lot, so I've certainly been very productive and probably worked more intensively for longer hours than almost any other period in my career. So I've certainly experienced that sort of Zoom call burnout type thing that we've all talked about. I had a period of back pain at one stage. I'm not sure if that was from PE from Joe or just too much sitting, because I think in my normal practice, I would have spent a lot of time going around between meetings, traveling out to see clients, probably 1-2 days a month home working as well, but I wouldn't have just been sitting in front of a screen so intensively all the time. So physically, I found that a bit difficult. And during the summer, I've went back into the office periodically from time to time, and I've been back in a few days more recently as well. And I really, really enjoy that. I really enjoy going in just for a change of scenery, to collaborate with some colleagues, to see some people. But I still really enjoy the working from home. So I've really found that mix quite good, and I'm looking forward to it continuing.
Great, and Maureen.
Thanks, Chris. We found it quite easy at first because we've always worked a hybrid model at Sullivan Brown. So when I set up the business, I wanted it to be a completely flexible model, which was totally at odds with the rest of the recruitment industry that we all came from. So my team were always able to come into the office when they wanted, work from home when they wanted, work from wherever. So for us, from a practical point of view, it was easy just to say, okay, we're all at home now. That made no difference to us whatsoever. We were always able to do that. I think obviously it was a big difference for our customers. So we had to take all of our recruitment online. We weren't quite sure how businesses were going to respond to that. There was a lot of, we can't recruit online at first. And now, of course, everyone's recruiting online. So that's been an interesting evolution. We've had to utilise technology an awful lot more for being able to deliver our services, so Zoom, Teams, other various video interviewing software that we're still implementing now. And we see a lot of that carrying on as we move forward because, you know, environmental, time issues, we've just realised the benefits of that. And from running a business and a personal point of view, I was used to working from home, but I've really enjoyed it. I'm not traveling as much, so I've suddenly found time to exercise. So I'm doing more exercise than I've ever done because I'm doing it at home. So that's been great. I've seen more of my children. But a bit like Derek, you know, I mean, I'm self-employed, so I'm used to never really switching off, and I've worked non-stop pretty much. You know, as a business owner, I've had to digest all of the information that's coming at us about furlough and grants and everything else and work my way around that. So it's been really non-stop, but I think there's been huge benefits for me that I will look to take forward. I wouldn't want to run a small business through a pandemic again if I can possibly help it, but there have been benefits. There's been a lot of learning. The hybrid element of it not been a problem for us. We've seen businesses adapt hugely in the way that they're recruiting and onboarding, and that's been great to see. So obvious challenges aside, and the fact that none of us, I don't think, would ever want to live through this again, I think actually it's been good for us. The team's managed to stay really connected. Now that my children are back in school, I go to the office 3 days a week. I'm the only one there at the moment, and all of our team meetings are done virtually. And we're really looking forward to being able to get back together, but it won't be every day because it never was. So for us, it's not been a huge change personally, but massively in how we're delivering what we do.
There was something I thought was quite interesting in what you said at the start there, Maureen, and Derek, I want to take this over to you in a second as well about this, the idea of kind of necessity being the mother of all invention, right? You know, that you are obviously dealing with clients that are saying, we can't, you know, how on earth are we going to do this because we can't possibly recruit digitally. Interestingly, the guy that lives across the road from me, he's a recruiter, and he was an internal recruiter, and he probably was in that same boat, you know, sort of pulling his hair out, going, how do I cope with this? And then I spoke to him just recently, and he's invested in a 15 grand cabin to go in the back of his car. So he's really committed to the home working. I hope he has anyway. That's a lot of money to spend on a shed. But it's, you know, he's really committed to that. Have you seen that both, I suppose, from 2 points of view, when you're dealing with clients and recruitment, that they've actually gone, hold on a minute, why were we doing it like that when we can do it like this? It's kind of forced people into new thinking. And also as a small business owner, I guess you know, there would have been immediate concerns. You go, actually, we've discovered lots of new things, because like for us, we weren't doing webinars periodically. We are now, and we've had 10,000 people engage with them over the last year, which is, you know, 3 times as much as we've had to our physical events in the past. So, you know, just talk me through some of the things that you think you've seen in terms of that shift because of necessity.
I think the shift has been huge, and I think it's been rapid. I honestly think the world of work has evolved by 20 years in a year, for all kinds of reasons. But I think when we first went into lockdown, honestly, I wondered whether I would have a business 12 months later. Right. I didn't know what was going to happen. A lot of recruitment was just cancelled, again, for lots of different reasons, but everyone just paused. And we waited to see what would happen. And of course, it picked up. We saw a lot of conversations on social media about we'll never be able to recruit remotely. It doesn't work. It has to be face to face. But of course, necessity has meant that that can't happen, and businesses have continued. I think, you know, much as this has been very difficult, this hasn't been like some of the recessions and challenging times that I've lived through before as a recruiter. The financial crash, for example, where everything stopped. actually a lot of sectors have been very, very busy, and maybe busier than they were before, so they've had to keep going. So you have to recruit, you have to move forward, you have to onboard, and we've seen companies really adapt to that. You know, we've filled so many jobs over the last 12 months where that person has still not actually met anyone face to face in the business that they're working in. They've still never been on site or set foot in the office. And there are some companies that are really fine with that, and others that find it more difficult. It's quite a personal thing. But we've seen companies adapt to it really well, and it's worked. And we've seen them invest in onboarding technology to make the onboarding experience virtual and more engaging than it would have been if it was just being done at a distance without that technology. So yeah, we've seen huge investment, but actually in a lot of cases it's not been financial investment, it's just been a change in the way that people are working, and we've seen it work really well, and seen recruitment done very successfully during that time, thank goodness.
Absolutely. Derek, I mean, I can imagine when workplaces were shut in March, I should imagine there was a lot of emails pinging around and clients on the phone and phone calls being arranged, as you know, everyone had to rapidly mobilize a mass evacuation out of these buildings that we're so used to seeing populated in certain ways. But how have you seen that kind of, I guess, that initial panic to, have you actually seen, you know, touching on some of the stuff Maureen's brought in about work evolving and having to evolve, and people going, well, hold on a second, have you started to see that kind of change in mindset where it was initially, it was, you know, survival, then it was like, well, hold on a minute, you know, we've been doing it this way for years, and now we realize we don't have to, and actually that might change the way we approach workplace strategies in the future?
Yeah, I think when the first sort of lockdown happened, the panic mode was effectively, I suppose there was two elements to it. One was about sort of safely, almost decommissioning, almost shutting down the building safely. You know, things need to be switched off, systems need to be drained. You know, I mean, security contractors, for example, might have had to provide more security, but then again, cleaning contractors, catering contracts had to be sort of paused, etc. And there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to have to staff. So there was a focus around that. On the other hand, then at the same time, there was a big focus. Well, how can I support people working from home? Now, at a firm like PwC, we did a lot of remote working already anyway. So we already all had laptops, all had mobiles, didn't have desktop telephones. We had all the sort of cloud-based technologies and cybersecurity things to enable us to work remotely safely, albeit we didn't do it as much as we could have done previously, but the tools were in place. But for many companies, they didn't have that. So there was a lot of companies who were doing mass panic buying of laptops and mobile phones and, you know, Zoom licenses for people, etc., and then working out that you needed passwords for Zoom and all this sort of stuff. And you know, and of course, I mean, I should have said my own experiences of lockdown. I'm fortunate. I've got a nice little dedicated space that's private, it's comfortable, I can work in. Many people don't. Many people are sitting on sofas or perched in the end of beds in kids' bedrooms or sitting at kitchen tables. Some people were quite inventive early on. I mean, an ironing board makes a really good adjustable standing desk, for example, you know, but people were doing these sorts of things to put stuff together. Companies were working out, well, what do I need to do to support my staff working from home, and what can I do? You know, so the remote workplace assessment, for example, is something that existed before, but people started adopting it more widely. A lot of people started doing pulse surveys with staff about what their employee experience was, how they were feeling it, really to understand what people's pain points were. And a lot of those sort of policies and flexibilities that, well, you know, why can't you work early in the morning and work later at night and actually do your homeschooling during the day? You know, how does that impact our business if people do that? And actually, to an extent, you didn't have a choice; you had to do that. You know, and like many people, you know, I've had the kids and the pets and the Amazon driver interrupting all my work. I think it's been fantastic to see how flexible both individuals and companies have been, but really, especially early on, they didn't have much choice. They really had to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting area to explore, because what my kind of observations of this whole period, and I was talking to someone who's been heavily involved in the government smart working program, which is looking at working in a completely different way, is that she sort of talked about the fact that the sort of previously held beliefs about working from home and people slacking off and all this sort of stuff, and the formality that people sort of expected from working from home, this whole interruptions, like you say, Derek. A lot of this stuff is kind of, our perceptions have changed about home working. There was actually a study in America that said they thought that 20% of productivity is going to be driven by home working, as opposed to 5% prior to the pandemic. And that's come from a shift in perceptions around home working, better than expected experiences. People are doing it and go, do you know what, this isn't too bad. We saw that in one of our early polls, actually. There's a lot of benefits to it about lack of commute, the spending time with your kids. I mean, I had twins during the pandemic, and I've put them to bed every night. I've seen every milestone. I haven't had that, and it's first time parent for me. So I can imagine there's dads that come home and like our data shows, it's probably going to be a dad, unfortunately, that unfortunate that it's the preconceived idea that they're the ones that have got to go out to do the work, but also they're the ones that miss out, and I think they miss out on an awful lot. They don't come back from work and say, oh, they stood up today and you missed it, and it's like, I've seen all that stuff. So I think there's a lot going to change, and Maureen, I guess that's going to start coming through in terms of recruitment strategies, in terms of talent, which this is where I guess the two worlds collide, isn't it? Because our organisation is going to have to start talking about their flexible policies, and we had it before. There'd be a flexible policy, flexible working available almost, but is it now expected? And so are you seeing that coming from organisations kind of foregrounding that flexible opportunity, and candidates going, I'll only be interested in positions that offer me that? Are you seeing that shift? Because that's going to have an impact on the workplace community being able to provide it, right?
Yeah, but we're really seeing that shift, certainly from a candidate expectation, and also we're seeing it from people that we speak to who are looking for a new role as part of their priorities, and whether they're being driven to that by a lack of flexibility in the future with their current employer having been at home. So with flexible policies, that's a really interesting one, because actually companies are struggling to get that right and figure out what that looks like moving forward, because the danger of putting in another policy is that you just end up with people feeling very much the same, but being at home 2 days and in 3 days, but still very much mandated around the times that they work, which isn't what we've been used to over the last year. People have been able to have that further flexibility because we've had children at home and it's been accepted. So there's an interesting conundrum there for companies as we start to put in flexible working policies about how much regulation do you put in around times that people work and everything else. With regards to candidate experience and what candidate expectations all the time. So this time last year, we would never have been asked the question, how many days will I be in the office? How many days will I be at home? As a matter of course on every bit of recruitment that we do. And now we are. And when we take a brief from a client, we're having to ask that question because we have to be able to answer it. So, and those clients that are saying, well, we will be back in the office 5 days a week. Whereas a year ago, that was the norm. And everyone would have said, okay, well, I'll do it if I have to, but if I could get 4 days, that would be great. Now that's seen as archaic, it's seen as old-fashioned, it's seen as inflexible, and candidates make real judgments on the culture of the business based on the answer to that question. So it's gone from being almost nothing a year ago to being one of the first questions people expect us to answer. And actually, we've seen it in the job boards. They've changed the way that you create a vacancy on the job boards to accommodate that. We're putting it in our adverts because we know that people will want to know. So it's actually at the forefront of people's minds now. And they don't mind if we need to say to them, look, the company hasn't decided what that policy will be yet because they're still working through it and there's going to be a phase of test and learn. They don't mind that. But when we say it's 5 days in an office and that is what they're going back to, that is not viewed positively.
No, and I can imagine. And Derek, there's some of the questions that are coming through, and guys, keep your questions coming in. Some of the questions that are coming through are kind of saying, look, we've kind of all accepted that it's probably 3 to 4 days is going to be our kind of typical pattern, which is, fine on the face of it, but it's the practicalities of that, right? From a real estate point of view, which is, Tuesdays, where we're probably going to have everyone that wants to be in at some point is going to be in. Fridays are going to be like a ghost town, but we need the same space for the whole week. So we're over occupied, we're under occupied, which is definitely happened before, right? We know that happened before, but it's going to be exaggerated now, I guess. And then the sort of practicalities again, well, okay, well, when someone tips up on a Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on what their preference is, if we're going to go completely kind of relaxed on that sort of thing, are they going to expect a desk to walk into, and how do we manage that? What spaces are we providing? Because if you're working from home, it would nod towards concentrated tasks at home and then collaborative tasks in the office, which seems a bit binary to me, but this is the stuff people are wrestling with, right? Is actually what is the right size space? What the space do we have in there, and how on earth do we manage it?
Yeah, it is a real challenge. I mean, there's probably two approaches companies can take, and the first one sounds a bit brutal and painful, but it is a valid strategy, and that's just let it run its course, let it go naturally, see what happens. You know, there will be people who turn up at 10:30 on a Thursday and they ain't going to get a desk because the place is full of. You know, so that will happen, but manage that pain. See how people react. My experience, and I've worked in those sort of offices where that happens on a regular basis. People are inventive. People will find a place to sit and a place to work, and they you know, in a sense, market forces will take over. So you know, and if they see a desk that's got stuff sitting at it, but nobody's been there for an hour, they'll push the stuff to the side and they'll occupy it and they'll use it. You know, people will vote with their feet and manage, but also it starts to drive behaviors, because if people know that if you come in after 10 o'clock on a Thursday, you ain't going to get a desk, people will start saying, well, you know what, I'll come on a Friday or a Wednesday instead. So it starts. So one strategy is to do nothing and let it sort of self-manage, albeit there will be a degree of pain to go through until that sort of behavioral ecosystem gets established. Now most companies don't seem to be taking that route. There's more of like a managed flexibility. So how do you manage this? And it's a real contradiction, because as Maureen says, everyone wants flexibility, and if your employer isn't going to give you flexibility, the talent will go to the flexibility they want. But it's a real paradox of giving people the flexibility they need, but the company maintaining the control of the input that they actually need to meet the customer requirements. So you can start to manage it. There's different ways of doing this. So one way is, I mean, we've had systems at PwC, for example. If I've wanted to go in during the lockdowns, etc., and even now, I have to book a desk in advance. I have to effectively request permission. So one way of managing it is you always have to effectively get a boarding pass to come into the office through requesting it. And once a certain number of people have done that, you ain't going to get one because there's no more capacity. And maybe if you're doing a system like that, you have to prioritize certain teams or prioritize certain grades or prioritize certain roles depending on what that activity is at certain times. So I mean, that's one way to manage it, which isn't popular, but it's a way. The way that I think is really interesting is using various nudges to encourage people to come in off outside of the peak effectively. So for example, we're seeing some companies talk about doing free coffee, free food, free fruit, maybe even free lunches on a Friday, to encourage some people who wouldn't come in on a Friday to come in on a Friday otherwise. We see companies that have parking, perhaps restricting parking permits. So, you know, you want a parking permit, okay, you can have one on Monday or a Friday, but you're not going to get one on a Thursday. You know, various sort of little nudges and policies you can try and put in place to nudge that behavior from people. Also, I think teams as well. People want to come in to collaborate with colleagues. So another sort of way of nudging it is to allocate certain days to certain teams. So, you know, the accounts team are going to try and get together on a Wednesday. The HR team are going to try and get together on a Monday. So that people are drawn to coming in those days because they know there's a greater chance of their colleagues being in those days. But it is just to say, it is a real conundrum and paradox, but it shouldn't stop people reducing the size of their portfolio if they can do so to still meet demand, because the potential size of the prize of reducing that portfolio has huge benefits, and it can create a problem at that sort of peak. But then you need to just sort of take some actions to try and manage that peak and the outcomes of it.
Yeah, so I mean that's something I wanted to explore as well at some point, but maybe we'll come back to that. But there's a lot of headlines about certain organisations shedding space, and let's face it, they were probably already going to shed that space. I don't know many organisations that can rearrange their leases at that sort of short turnaround. So I suspect they were already planning something similar, if not exacerbated slightly by what's happening. It's interesting you talk about this kind of incentive and nudge kind of thing, because I was in with a very progressive digital organisation who may or may not have chaps all around the country delivering takeaway food in blue bags. I was chatting away to them, and they use their service to create what they call the Hunger Games on a Friday, where everybody can put a free order in. And you just see all these delivery guys rock up, and when I was there, I was there on a Friday, and I said it's like that time when they dropped the cow into the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. It was just like a feeding frenzy. I've never seen anything like it in my life. But you kind of look back on it now and go, well, they did that. They only did it on a Friday. They could have done it any day of the week. They only did it on a Friday. They're probably quite a progressive organisation already, so they probably had quite a lot of flexibility in their culture. They had a basketball court in their office as well, so that kind of tells you a little bit about the culture. So they're already recognizing, actually, to spread things out a bit, we need to encourage a bit in here. But Maureen, there's going to be a cultural element to this as well, isn't there? It's about culturally, how do we do this as well? Because if we take the kind of very sort of flat view of culture, that it's essentially people like us do things like this, that's Seth Godin kind of talks like that, a marketing guru. But I just wonder, have you been talking to organisations or people on your HR network that are starting to think about what this says about us culturally, how we're going to respond culturally to this kind of remote, dispersed workforce challenge that we're facing?
Yeah, I think most of the clients that we're speaking to who are establishing where they go with this, they're heavily linking it to culture, because ultimately the success of whatever model they land on will have to be driven by their culture. The words that come up time and time again are trust and accountability, because these kind of work systems won't work with without trust, sorry. And when it comes to culture, I think it's interesting, because culture will drive this. Culture drives behaviours which will ultimately get us to the place that we land with how companies are working. And I think it's about how creative companies are willing to be in order to get to that final point. So, we're all thinking 2 days, 3 days, but no one will want to be in on a Monday and on a Friday. Why are we even thinking full days at this point? Because culturally we always have. There's so much that's ingrained in us at this point, because we've been working for years, and it can be hard for us to think beyond it. So what we're seeing actually is a huge uptake in people wanting specialists to come in and do cultural work with them. Huge increase in the amount of leadership development that's going on, because businesses are realizing the importance of having to make these changes. And it might not be that they're looking to change their culture, but they've just realized the huge importance of defining it and defining their purpose, so that people know what they're buying into and they understand how that works and then translates practically. Because the only alternative is to go down a very process driven, you book in on this day, you come in this day, and once there's that many people in, you can't come in. And culturally, that might not match what a business is. So actually, if we're going to be more flexible moving forward, culture is huge in this, but it's not always easy to answer, and it's not always easy to shift. So for my business, we're a small business, we started off this way, so it's really easy for me. For a larger business, it's like shifting an oil tanker. So you can't say, well, do you know what? Everyone will be vaccinated by September, so we'll have our culture and our solution absolutely nailed by then, and we'll all be back in and doing as we do. I don't think you can do that. So I think the bigger businesses that we're speaking to, the ones that are getting it right, are saying, look, we don't have all the answers, people. We're working on it. We want to work on it with you. We will be testing and learning for another 12 months before we get to a point where this is really embedded in the day-to-day way that we work, and we want to work collaboratively with you to reach that point.
Yeah, and that's the two words you said in there that really stuck out: trust and accountability. And Derek, I want to kind of explore that a little bit with yourself, and that We had and you might have heard of her, Maureen, Lucy Adams, who's a very renowned HR speaker. She spoke at our conference a couple of years ago, and I remember her talking about the evolution of HR as a profession and likened it to what we're going through in FM, which is, HR has been very much policy driven, almost a parent-child relationship with employees. And I think, the reality was, I think FM's probably not a million miles away from that itself. If you think about the signs that go up and telling people how to tidy the meeting rooms up and telling people not to do this and to do that, so you can sort of see some parallels in there. But this idea of trust is going to have to be a cultural thing. But accountability, I think, is really interesting for FM teams at the moment, because a lot of the questions that we've had coming through relate to sort of compliance and legislation and stuff, like DSE and fire safety and all the rest of it. And suddenly teams are going, well, if part of the workplace experience is not in our building, where does my responsibility start and stop? And I think there's two ways of looking at it, isn't there? There's a legal way, and I'm not going to ask either of you to give legal advice, and anyone watching should not take legal advice, and all the necessary disclaimers come with that. But there's a kind of I guess at a professional level, a cultural way of looking at that, which is where does workplace experience start and stop? If you're responsible for that in your organization, where does it start and stop? Because up until recently, I suspect people will be thinking about the boundaries of their concrete box as being, once you're in here, that's my domain, but if you want to work from home, that's up to you. But that's now blurred completely, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going back to an old cliche, work is an activity, not a place. So we need a bit of a cultural mind shift around this. And I think the impact for sort of workplace and facilities management practitioners and as a discipline, etc., it probably sits in two different areas. And one is how can we actually provide services to people when they're outside of the traditional office, so when they're working from home or working in other locations. And the second one is then, so we still have an office. It may be smaller, it's probably serving a slightly different purpose, but how do we need to change the services we provide to people when they are in to enhance their experience and make that space be used efficiently? And I think the changes are in those two areas. And if I talk about people working at home first, so yeah, as you say, traditionally people are working from home. Well, that's their choice. The only exception to that, I guess, is where it was defined. I mean, Maureen probably knows better than me, but where it was defined as you must work from home, then the employer had some obligations in terms of workplace assessments, whatever. I think that's completely gone out the window now. You need, whether you legally have to or not, you need to do workplace assessments of people working from home. You need to provide them with what they need. If there are companies out there, and there are companies out there at the moment, by the way, who are still trying not to provide people with chairs or screens or keyboards or the various equipment they need, and they should be, right? Yeah, I'll say that I absolutely should be, or providing cash in consequence of it, because we have to provide that. You have to keep the productivity and the wellness of people and enable them to actually do their work when they're not in the office. You may well be able to reduce your space and save a reasonable bit of money, but some of that needs to be reinvested in providing services in the home. And how do you do that? And some of the FM companies are starting to offer services and even form little companies that are providing services to people in the home. We're starting to hear people move beyond just provision of furniture and provision of workplace assessments. So should your company, for example, collaboratively buy green energy and open that up to their employees to benefit? Does my employer have a responsibility? Should I be showing my gas safety certificate to my employer to prove that my heating is actually safe? Should my employer be contributing to my utility costs? I mean, the counter argument to that is often, well, no, because you're saving the commuting cost. But there's a whole range of things there that there's a role for facilities managers to play in, as that, working with their HR colleagues as to how to help and support people in that home office environment. And that's a completely new area that's been evolving over the last sort of 18 months, whatever, and has still got a long way to go, I think. But I think it's a really interesting area, and I think we'll see a lot more development in that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've sort of contemplated. So one of the we do another survey, what we call the Market Outlook survey, where we survey client organisations and service providers about the state of the FM market. But one of the questions we sort of talked about COVID this year. We talked about how many people are offering flexible, how many people at a client organisation are going to offer flexible working? It's about 84%, 85% of people said, yeah, but we're looking at it now. And then how many people are saying that they're going to reduce the amount of space they got? I think it was something in the range, I'm going off the top of my head here, about 55% of organisations said, yeah, we're going to reduce the amount of space we've got. You combine that with another question that we asked, where 30% said that they were seeing their FM budgets reduced. And what this made me worry about is because of this fragmented approach to workplace experience we have with HR and FM teams rarely talking to each other, is that if an organisation views its FM budget as a cost-saving mechanism and goes, wow, we're going to make loads of savings here, let's pocket them. What the sort of advice I've been giving to people is anything you save here, invest in supporting hybrid working, supporting culture that will support hybrid working, the kit, and that's going to be the challenge. In terms of taking us in a slightly different direction, there's one thing that I've been really curious about is, and I worry about as well, is that some of the big headlines from the big organisations coming out saying we've gone in this direction, and a lot of SMEs sitting there going, yeah, how are we going to do that, and then is that going to set, like you said, Maureen, some of those expectations are being driven by the headlines. And now Derek, PwC have been at the forefront of that, and we've talked previously about how it was a continuation of a theme, right? So it wasn't necessarily a big change, but probably the one that caught my eye the most was Spotify. And a lot of people talked about Spotify, and they produced this blog post where they talked about their work from anywhere policy, which was, look, you work where you need to work to do the work you need to do. If you want to come into a Spotify building, great. Here's where they are around the world. You can rock up and do whatever you want. If you don't, you can work from home. That's fine. We'll support that and all the rest of it. And if you do want to work in a building, but you're nowhere near one of our offices, we'll sort you out with a club membership at a co-working space or whatever you need so that you can get out. So it just sort of struck me. It's like, wow, that is really fluid. And I think the only thing they said they were sort of instructing was that we have core hours of business. So as long as you're available during these core hour of business, 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day, depending on time zones and all the rest of it, you could do whatever you want. And I just thought, wow, that's such a departure. But it throws up two things, and this is where my question, Maureen, I'm going to come to you first on it, is this idea that if it's work from anywhere, it's also talent from anywhere, right? How do you start to see people going, I don't need to worry about where Derek, I'll probably talk to you about location strategy off the back of it, because a lot of the time workplaces where you talk to workplace teams at some of the really big organizations, they're like, yeah, we're going to go to Budapest because we needed lots of digital natives, and there's a real hot spot for digital talent in Budapest, and now you're sitting there going, well, you don't actually need to do that now. You don't need to do it that way. So Maureen, have you started to see organizations really expand their thinking when it comes to talent and recruitment?
You would think so, wouldn't you? But actually, no.
Oh, right.
No. So what we're seeing is that in the interim market, that we recruit a lot of HR interims, and in the interim market, we're seeing people can be based anywhere. We don't mind where they are. This is an interim project. We're all at home at the moment anyway. So listen, dial in from wherever. So in the interim market, absolutely. But interestingly, in the permanent recruitment market, no, we've not seen it filter through. Now, that will be slightly different for large global businesses who already had a culture of working from anywhere and people not all being together. But in the majority, what we're seeing is that companies are still figuring out what their model is going to look like moving forward. There's not that many that have come out and said, this is us now, this is what we're doing. And because of that, there's a nervousness, and companies are still clinging on to, we do need to be together at some stage. So a lot of the permanent recruitment is going along the lines of, we don't mind people being based a little bit further away than they would usually, because we're happy if they just want to come in 1 day a week, 2 days a week, but we'd still like it if they lived close enough that they're happy to do that. So what we're seeing is that it's kind of broadened the geographical boundaries within which people will look for work, because they don't mind adding a 20 miles onto the commute when they're only having to do it once or twice a week. But what we're not really seeing yet in general is true geographical mobility. You can be anywhere, because we're still not in the main in a place mentally where we can picture ourselves not being together for a certain amount of time of the week. So we haven't seen it land in the permanent marketplace yet. Whether it will, whether it won't, we don't know. My feeling is not, actually, in a lot of professions.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's utterly shattered one of my dreams of sitting on the beach somewhere really hot, working for an organisation in Hertfordshire. Derek, though, in terms of Spotify's approach, that will start to have impacts on real estate strategy, right? And that's some of the things that's coming through around, you know, the shift from city centres to regional hubs. And the government were already kind of doing that with their hub strategy, right? So in many respects, in the public sector, they're kind of already down that journey, albeit they might be looking at some of those hubs thinking they're a bit bigger than maybe we needed. But so how do you see some of those kind of real estate trends coming through now as organisations a bit more picky about where they put their buildings?
Yeah. I think the first thing to say probably is that, you know, there's no right answer. Okay, I mean, Spotify's model, you know, they've decided that's right for them. Every company needs to think a bit about what's right for them, right for their business, right for their customers, right for their workforce, and that's one extreme example. That's not going to be right for other businesses. So companies really need to think about what's right for them. And really, I mean, you know, it's traditional still process. Really, you got to understand the demand for what real estate, what space you actually need. And I think this is where the change is, because there's been a fundamental acceleration in that changing demand. So this idea of people can work more flexibly and don't need to be in the office less, and there'll be greater automation and use of technology, etc. It's not new. It existed pre-pandemic. You know, as I think you referred to it earlier, Chris, many companies already had plans to reduce their real estate over time. This is, so it's not new, but it's probably accelerated and magnified it. So, you know, many companies we're speaking to are looking at reducing footprints by up to 50%, for example. Previously, they might have been looking at 20, 30%, and they might now be looking at up to 50 and looking at that more quickly. Other companies are still thinking of not reducing their footprint so much, but maybe using the space for more value-added activities. So it's not all about less space. It's about also using space for different purposes. And so what I would say is that the real estate today is probably going to serve a different purpose as we all sort of return to the office now. I mean, traditionally, if you think of the office, if you think of an office, you tend to think of banks of desks and people quietly working away and maybe meeting rooms around the perimeter. We talk about the new purpose of the office now, probably as a sort of like a 5C model. And I've written these down now because I probably couldn't remember them otherwise. But, you know, collaboration, community, concentration, creativity, and coaching. Now, concentration is the old one, but actually the proportion of your space that has to meet those other activities, especially community and collaboration, are much bigger than they used to be. So essentially, I mean, again, it's not the same for every company, but it probably means an awful lot less desks and a lot more casual meeting room type space and a lot more small meeting rooms and a lot more space for interaction. That's probably the shapes of the workplaces in the future. Now, some of that is counter to the size, because, you know, your collaboration, your community space probably takes up more square meters than a desk does. So, you know, so you got to balance that in as well. But overall, we probably expect that there will be a reduction in footprint. There will be changes in locations. And very importantly, there will be changes in the layout of the office, changes in how people use it, and very importantly for FMs, therefore, changes in the services that need to be provided to people when they're in the workplace.
What I liked about the 5 Cs, because I've seen variations of the Cs, you know, doing rounds in workplace design, but it's the first time I've heard someone talk about coaching, and I guess what that's a nod to is this kind of learning from others, this kind of tacit knowledge type model. And Maureen, I wondered whether you've got some experience. I don't know how in touch you keep with candidates once they've been placed, but, you know, have you had any sort of sense for how they found that whole process of landing in the company new, having a digital induction? You know, are they sitting there go, I'm not really picking things up as quickly as I did at my last job? Or, you know, have you started to see some of that? And particularly, and sorry to give you a multi-layered question, but particularly with young people, you know, that might be doing their first job in these sort of, you know, in the workplace and learning from others. Have you had any kind of sense of what's happening around that kind of learning and coaching and knowledge transfer stuff?
Yes. So when people were first recruited at the beginning of the pandemic and people were brought in and they were onboarded, everyone was really positive about that. And partly that was because companies were making a real effort to get that right. They've had to change those processes out of necessity, as you said earlier, because otherwise, well, there's no other option, is there? So they've had to do that, and people were really positive about that. But yeah, as we're getting 12 months down the line, we're starting to see people finding it a little bit more challenging because they don't necessarily feel as culturally embedded as they would have done previously. And also there's a lot of learning by osmosis goes on in an organization. So, you know, you learn because you're sat next to somebody and you hear them say something and you ask a question about it, or that's curiosity, isn't it? It's another C. So you ask a question, or you just learn that and you find yourself repeating it further down the line because it's a really interesting thing that you heard. So people are missing out on that. And certainly, you know, when you look at, you know, whether it's younger people or just new people coming in, maybe, you know, apprentices, trainees, people who are new in a role, that's much more difficult. And that's one of the challenges that companies are facing now as they try to understand what their model is going to be moving forward, is actually how fair is it to bring in an apprentice or a trainee and not have them sat with someone who's a mentor, someone who can just pick up on those ad hoc questions day by day and minute by minute that you wouldn't necessarily ask in a standard coaching time. So there is definitely going to have to be an element of that built in, which is why the hybrid model is probably the way most businesses will go in some form or another, and those collaboration spaces are great. But yeah, we're just starting to see it now, 12 months in, people saying it's just not quite the same. And this is why I think it's very brave of companies to come out and say, this is what we're doing. We're nailing our flag to this. This is our approach. Because actually, we don't really know yet. You know, it's only now a year on that people are starting to see what's worked and hasn't worked for them from being onboarded manually. And also, you know, you ask people, do you want to come back to the office? They say yes, and they say that they feel good being onboarded that way, but then they come back to the office and it's not the same because there's not as many people. The catering's not the same, it's not as buzzy, and then they go, actually, I said I did, but I don't because it's not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of learning still to go through and journeys to go on, and I think the learning and the coaching is one element that's going to have to develop, and people are going to have to realise how that works, because that ad hoc on the job learning is valuable and can't be done as well remotely.
Well, what I'm hearing there is keep an open mind. Yeah, and Derek, it really echoes something you said earlier on, is let's not jump into new models immediately, but let's also not assume that the past is a good template for the future either. So suck it and see, and keep yourself flexible, keep yourself agile. Look, we've run out of time. As always the case with these things, you sometimes feel daunted about how we're going to keep the conversation going for an hour, but we have, and I could keep going. So thank you to Derek and Maureen. Thank you very much for helping us with your contributions today. It's been very useful, and I'm sure the audience have really enjoyed that as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll hear from you soon in the future. For everyone else, thanks for joining us today. Just a couple of reminders out there. I just wanted to remind everyone about our COVID-19 resource page, which contains lots of practical guidance, signposts to other useful resources, data highlights from our studies, some of which we've talked through today. And these resources are constantly being reviewed and updated. So take a look, keep revisiting it. We're always updating it. And we're also going to, just to let people know, the polling data that we've done, we're going to publish more of that later on in the year. We are going to do one more study. We want to do a poll sort of after lockdown, hopefully in July, sort of August time, September time, just to get a sense of, like, as restrictions ease, hopefully, what does that look like when people actually have a bit more flexibility and choice. So keep a lookout for that. I want to remind everyone about our general content hubs anyway. So there's stacks of guidance, stacks of best practice that you can visit on there, some of which of it is free to access, others are member only, but go and have a look at the Insight Hub and explore. There's a quick reminder about our awards. The entry deadline's coming up. Lots of different categories for people to enter. We've had some great interest, but if you've done some incredible work, particularly over the last 18 months, which have been the most incredible that we probably could have imagined. Make sure you get recognition for it. Make sure you enter these awards. It's really important that we keep showcasing best practice. And we've got our conference tickets available now. We've launched that in the last few weeks. We've got speakers confirmed, comedian and screenwriter Deborah Francis White, and historian and broadcaster David Olusoga, OBE, talking about women in the workplace, talking about Black Lives Matter. David Olusoga is a big commentator on that, so looking at diversity and inclusion, looking at equality, all those sorts of things. And we've got stacks of other speakers lined up. There's tickets available for the physical event and digital tickets as well. So really excited about that. Take a look when you get a chance. But otherwise, that's everything for us. We'll be back here, same time, same place next week. Completely different topic. We'll be chaired by Vicky O'Farrell, the behaviour queen, who's going to be talking about behaviours, particularly around burnout. And I think actually that would have been a really interesting topic for us to talk about. But how can we avoid burnout? What are the things to look for? We'll talk about burnout in general. But until next week, thanks again to our guests. Thanks to the tech team here. We've got Lucy and Annie, who you don't see in the background, making sure that I say the right things and everything works. So thank you to them. Don't forget, today's recording will be available on the website for everyone who wants to have a listen or share with a friend. But from all of us here at IWFM, have a great week. Stay safe. Thanks again. Speak soon.